Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Tonight, we're hitting the highways of Alaska, a place where winter shadows swallow the road for hours at a time, and the cold can freeze diesel engines solid before you even know something's wrong. But here's the truth about Alaska that nobody warns truckers about. The freezing air and endless road aren't the most terrifying things out there. We've got 6 real stories tonight from drivers who are just trying to finish their routes through the Alaskan winter. A long-haul trucker who saw something on an empty stretch of highway at a.m. That made him quit the job forever. A delivery hauler who came across a rest stop that vanished by sunrise, and 5 others who confronted things on the road that still defy every explanation. Some of these drivers crossed state lines and never came back. Some never touched a steering wheel again. And one of them isn't even convinced they're fully human anymore. If you're new to Scripture Horror, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell because we deliver the darkest true stories that'll keep you awake behind the wheel. Now, turn off your lights. Get settled in and let's uncover what's really waiting out there on Alaska's endless winter highways. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some routes just aren't worth the paycheck. My name is Carlos Mendez, and for the last 3 years I've been driving long-haul routes for Northern Star Freight out of Fairbanks, Alaska. I first took this job back in my sophomore year at the University of Alaska Fairbanks to pay for textbooks, gas, and rent. What started as weekend hauls turned into my main source of income when I realized I could make real money driving the late-night winter routes through the interior highways. Most truckers avoid those shifts. The roads ice over, blackouts hit without warning, and the cold is brutal enough to freeze your eyelids together. But the pay was good, and the night bonuses were even better. I knew every turn in the Fairbanks network, every fuel stop, every rest station, every quiet stretch of highway where the road goes dark for 50 miles. My old Kenworth wasn't pretty, but it had studded tires, a heater that never failed, and enough emergency gear in the cab to survive a week if I ever got stuck. In Alaska, being prepared isn't smart, it's survival. My manager, Tony, had been running dispatch for 20 years. He trusted me with the strange routes, the last-minute orders, the hauls other drivers avoided. The money wasn't bad, but the real income came from hazard bonuses and late-night runs nobody else wanted. On a good weekend, I could bring home over $250 just in extra pay. That difference meant eating real food instead of living off microwave noodles. But what happened on January 12, 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my highways, and the things that move out there in the Alaskan dark where no building should exist. January 12 was the coldest night of the entire year. 42° FF. A kind of cold that burns exposed skin in seconds and freezes your breath before it hits the floor of your cab. Most drivers stayed home. Most freight companies shut down routes altogether. But that kind of cold makes demand spike. Towns need fuel, food, supplies. Tony handed me a sealed manifest just before midnight. He looked unsure, which was rare. "This one's different," he said. "Long haul up the Stees Highway. About 60 miles past your usual turnaround point." I opened the envelope. 5 heavy crates. Destination listed as Research Station 9. I had never heard of it. No coordinates I recognized. The road marker was somewhere deep along a stretch of highway barely anyone uses at night. "That's remote even for us," I said. "You sure it's legit?" Tony just turned his monitor so I could see the confirmation. Paid in full. Extra tip added manually. A $200 bonus. "Take it if you want it," he said. "Just be careful. Money like that doesn't show up often." I loaded the crates onto my trailer, secured the straps, and double-checked everything before climbing into the cab. The engine grumbled in the cold but eventually roared to life. I eased out onto the frozen highway. The dark pressed in from every side. Not even wildlife moved. The aurora overhead wasn't normal either. It glowed neon green and electric blue, pulsing across the sky like a living thing. I'd seen the northern lights hundreds of times, but never like this. They were sharp, structured, almost intelligent. Even the university had canceled evening classes that night. The roads were empty except for me and the endless stretch of ice ahead. About 30 minutes into the drive, the radio dissolved into static, then flickered back with a distant Fairbanks station. The GPS kept pushing me further north than I had ever gone, past abandoned cabins, closed mining stations, and long-dead logging sites. I kept glancing at the manifest. Research Station 9. No phone number, no contact name, no description of what I was hauling besides sealed cargo. After an hour, the GPS said I was nearing my destination. That didn't make sense. There was nothing around me but trees, snow, and a moonless sky filled with shimmering aurora. Then I saw it. A narrow access road cutting through the forest. I almost missed it completely. It wasn't on my maps or GPS. When my truck rolled off the highway and onto the snow-packed path, something inside me tightened. Like I had crossed a threshold I wasn't supposed to know existed. At the end of the road stood a long, windowed structure the size of a military trailer but lit up like a hospital. Bright white lights glared from every window. Massive generator units outside hummed loud enough to vibrate the air. I parked beside the entrance, jumped down from the cab, and the cold hit me like a hammer. Painful. Violent. Deep. Before I could knock, the door opened. A woman in a white lab coat stared at me like she wasn't expecting anyone. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Freight delivery for Research Station 9, I said, handing her the manifest. 5 sealed crates. She looked at the paperwork, confused. "We didn't order any shipment," she said. "This is the address on the manifest," I insisted. "Same coordinates. Same road." Behind her, I saw the inside of the building. And that's when everything in me went cold. Not from the weather, but from something deeper. The interior wasn't a small research lab. Walls lined with screens displayed moving star charts, shifting equations, calculations spiraling across monitors faster than any human could possibly interpret. Symbols that didn't look like any math I'd ever seen, shapes that seemed to twist and rearrange the longer I stared at them until my eyes felt wet and the back of my head throbbed. The woman sighed like she was hiding something and said, "Well, we'd been working all night. We'll take the crates." She signed for the delivery and handed me another 200 tip. Her hand shook when she passed it to me. I couldn't help asking, "What kind of work do you do out here?" She answered too quickly. Government climate analysis. Soil research. Weather tracking. A lie. I knew it instantly. Why run climate studies in the dead of winter, 60 miles from anything, with equipment designed for astrophysics? Why hide an entire facility in the middle of untouched forest? I hauled the crates inside myself. The air felt wrong, heavy, pressured, as if something unseen was vibrating through the walls. As I walked back to my truck, I glanced up. The aurora overhead had shifted again, but not randomly. It formed precise geometric patterns, perfect spirals, triangles, shapes that looked like higher dimensional diagrams drawn across the sky. I tried to take a picture, but through the camera lens the aurora looked normal. My eyes saw something the world refused to record. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. 10 minutes down the highway, the radio changed on its own. Music vanished. A series of faint voices crackled through the static, first Russian, then Chinese, then English. A calm voice said, 4 degrees north, 7 degrees west. Distance, 3-4 light years. Another voice, coordinates confirmed, signal strength optimal. Transmission initiated. Every channel I switched to said the same thing. Streams of numbers, coordinates, atmospheric readings, energy frequency measurements. All repeating. All synchronized. My hands were shaking, but I kept driving. Then the GPS glitched violently. According to my screen, I was underground at impossible speeds. The speedometer jumped between 0 and 140. The fuel gauge flipped from empty to full. The dashboard clock spun through hours like a wheel. I blinked, and suddenly I was nearing the Fairbanks city limits. My cab clock read 4:13 a.m. The entire round trip should have taken 2 hours, 3 at most. But 4 hours had passed. 4 hours I couldn't account for. 4 hours I couldn't remember. I pulled into the depot just as Tony was locking up. He studied my face. Rough road, I told him everything. The radio, the voices, the coordinates, the weird building. He tried to explain it away as the cold messing with electronics. Sure, extreme cold can cause malfunctions, but it doesn't make radios speak in multiple languages. It doesn't calculate star distances. It doesn't erase time. The next day, I went back alone. I had to see it in daylight. I had to know. But when I reached the same stretch of highway, nothing. No access road. No tire tracks. No building. No generator hum. Just untouched snow stretching into the distance. I checked the GPS coordinates twice. Then again, I was in the right place. The structure was gone without a trace. Back in Fairbanks, I asked every driver I knew if they'd ever heard of Research Station 9. Nobody had. I searched geological records. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, that entire region is permafrost hundreds of feet deep. Too unstable for building. Too remote for any legal station. But I had been there, and I still had the 200 tip. That night, the dreams began. I saw the equations from the monitors, but now they made sense. They weren't formulas, they were coordinates to star systems. Navigation charts. Interstellar communication pathways. Planetary orbital patterns. I woke up knowing atmospheric compositions of exoplanets no human had ever documented. I began answering questions in my astronomy class that my professor, Dr. Chen, didn't even expect undergraduates to understand. He asked where I learned the material. I couldn't tell him. I didn't know how to explain that it was just in my head. I dug deeper into the history of the Stees Highway. Old articles. Local legends. Indigenous stories. Reports of strange lights during solar storms going back more than a century. Tales of knowledge buried beneath the ice objects that fell from the sky long before humans lived here. Lights that weren't spirits. Structures that weren't shelters. Stories of something sleeping under the permafrost, waiting for signals. It wasn't government research. That building wasn't a lab. It wasn't meant for agriculture or soil. It was a receiver. Something was contacting something else. And something answered. I quit trucking 2 weeks later. I changed my major to astrophysics. I didn't have a choice. Once something opens inside your mind, you can't force it closed again. Every January 12 since then, I drive back to those coordinates and wait. I bring equipment, food, thermal gear. I sit in the dark under the shimmering sky and watch for the aurora to twist into those geometric shapes. I wait for the building to return. Because I need to know what they are sending. I need to know who or what is receiving it. And every year, standing in the silent frozen wilderness, I feel the same terrible certainty deep in my bones. Something ancient is coming back to Earth. And when it arrives, nothing on this planet will ever be the same again. I started this job straight out of high school because I needed to pay for my classes at Matsu Community College. The pay wasn't amazing, just a couple dollars more than minimum wage when you calculated the hours, but the schedule fit my life. I went to school during the day and drove the supply routes from midnight to 6 in the morning. People always imagined driving those dark Alaskan highways alone would be terrifying, but to me, the silence was peaceful. The road belonged to me, the headlights, and the cold. Most nights were routine. I'd pull my rig into the loading dock, unload pallets with another night stalker named Marcus, and talk to Jim, the old security guard who always patrolled the lot like he was protecting a Fort Knox instead of a grocery store. Between the three of us, we'd work in a giant empty store with no customers to bother us. It was the same schedule, the same steps, the same rhythm. You start to trust repetition out here. The routine becomes comfort. Winter in Alaska is brutal, especially in March when snow doesn't just cover the ground, it swallows it. The Safeway sits right at the edge of Wasilla, where the woods start creeping right up to the parking lot. I'd gotten used to seeing wildlife during my runs. Moose blocking the roads, wolves in the distance, sometimes bears just waking up from hibernation. The cold belongs to the animals here, and if you want to survive the night shift, you learn to share the land. But March 3rd was different. For weeks, the day shift had been complaining about torn packages scattered through the aisles. Cereal ripped open like something clawed through the boxes, soup cans dented and punctured like teeth had been through the metal. Packs of meat shredded, gnawed on, half-eaten. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a spill, and it wasn't normal. The manager, a guy named Dave, blamed raccoons, or maybe a bear slipping in through the broken loading dock door. That door had been busted since last season, and corporate never cared enough to fix it. They cared about numbers, not broken locks. But the question none of us could answer was the obvious one. How were they getting in without any of us seeing them? Jim walked the parking lot every hour. Marcus and I were constantly moving through aisles, unloading boxes, reorganizing shelves. We should have seen something, heard something, anything. But every night we came in and only saw the aftermath. Jim started talking about seeing shapes moving between the trees during his patrols. Not animals. Not bears. He said they walked upright like people, but too big to be human. He said they didn't move right. Not like they were born that way. When I asked him more about it, he always brushed it off like he imagined it. But the fear in his eyes was real. Jim was in his 50s, stubborn, old school, probably needed glasses but refused to admit it. I figured the long nights were playing with his mind. Around 2:00 a.m., I was stocking the last of the cereal pallets, headphones in, engine of my truck cooling behind the loading bay, music low and steady. The store was quiet except for the hum of freezers and occasional clatter of shifting shelves. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then I heard the automatic front doors. They slid open with that distinct electric drone and beeped twice, like someone had stepped inside. That shouldn't happen. We were closed. I saw Dave lock those doors himself before he left. I took my earbuds out. I left the pallet where it was and walked toward the entrance. The closer I got, the louder my footsteps echoed across the empty grocery floor. Something about that echo felt wrong, too sharp, too loud. When I reached the end of the aisle, I froze. 3 figures were standing just inside the entrance near the shopping carts. At first, I assumed they were late-night customers or employees from another location. Sometimes managers borrow supplies or shoplifters sneak in. It wasn't impossible. But then I noticed it, the way they stood. Their bodies were slightly hunched, like something had twisted their spines. Their arms hung too long, the joints bent in ways that didn't make sense. Their clothes were torn, filthy, covered in stains like they'd been sleeping in the woods for months. Their hair was matted. They looked like they'd been dragged out of the wild against their will and abandoned here. I stepped forward and shouted, "Hey, store's closed. You need to come back later." All 3 heads turned toward me at the exact same moment. Not slowly, not normally. Perfect synchronization. It was like their necks were wired together, like they were responding to the same signal. Their faces looked human, but their eyes didn't. They reflected the fluorescent lights like an animal's, the way a coyote or wolf looks when headlights catch them. Predators. One of them sniffed the air in sharp, jerking motions. Not like a person trying to identify a smell, more like something tracking prey. One tried to speak, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was like a voice tangled with a growl. A language that didn't belong in a store. I reached for my radio. "Jim, there are people in the store. Come to the front." No answer. "Jim, do you copy?" Jim. Static. The radio was working, but he wasn't answering. Then the 3 figures shifted forward. Not walking, not crawling. Knuckle walking like apes, only faster, heavier, dragging their arms like their bodies didn't belong to them anymore. The closer they came, the stronger the smell hit me. Rotting meat, wet fur, something diseased, something feral. I turned and ran. I sprinted down the back hallway, boots slamming the tile. I could hear them behind me, knuckles pounding the floor like hammers. I fumbled my keys, dropped them, picked them up with shaking hands, got into the office and slammed the door shut behind me. The store phone was next to the security screens. I dialed 911. Nothing. It rang once, crackled, and died. I tried again. Same result. Static. Silence. Something was blocking communication. When I turned to the monitors, my blood iced. There were more of them. Not just 3. At least a dozen. They were climbing in through the loading dock and slipping into the aisles. They weren't moving like animals searching for food. They inspected things. One crushed a metal soup can in its jaw and drank from it. Another ripped open cardboard and smelled the contents. They communicated. Not with words. Not with howls. But with clicks, low growls, and gestures. These weren't animals. But they weren't human anymore either. One monitor showed the break room. Jim was on the floor. Unconscious. Scratch marks tore through both arms. Deep, parallel lines. Too clean and even for randomness. Like claws. I knew I had to get to him. I opened the office door slowly and listened. The creatures were focused on the front of the store. I stayed low and crept down the hallway. When I reached Jim, he was still breathing but barely conscious. His skin was ice cold. I tried to wake him, but he didn't respond. Then I heard it, scratching against the office door I just left. Slow at first, then deeper. Like a massive dog dragging its claws across wood. They found where I had been. I couldn't stay. There was only one safe place in that whole store, the walk-in freezer. The latch locked from the inside. I grabbed Jim under the arms and dragged him across the floor. He was dead weight, but fear made me strong. I pulled him inside and slammed the freezer door shut. The temperature dropped instantly. Our breath hung in the air like fog. It was freezing, but we were safe. I used my cell phone to call Dave. He answered, sounding groggy. "What the hell, Tyler? There are people in the store." They attacked Jim. "Slow down. Are you saying someone broke in?" "Yes. But they're not normal. They're acting like animals. Walking on their hands, biting through metal. You want something? I'm serious. There are at least a dozen of them." He paused. "I'll call the police." "Stay where you are." He hung up. All we could do was listen. Their footsteps moved in patterns, aisle by aisle, shelf by shelf. They weren't smashing things. They were studying, testing, learning. At the customer service desk, I heard one mess with the register. Beep, 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 like a child trying to understand how it worked. Hours passed, slowly, painfully, then silence. I opened the freezer door. The store was empty. But what they left behind, the canned goods were sorted by type and arranged into perfect geometric shapes. Circles, triangles, squares. In frozen foods, blood was smeared across the freezer doors. Not random. Deliberate, coherent equations. Chemistry, biology, college-level symbols and formulas. These things hadn't just gone feral. They were evolving. The police showed up minutes later. Jim had no memory of anything. The security footage showed nothing but static for the exact hours of the incident. Dave showed up, saw the mess, saw my photos, and fired me. Corporate banned me from every Safeway location. Called it vandalism, a stunt, a breakdown. But the truth stayed. I started looking into missing persons, homeless people disappearing from Wasilla. Runaways, people camping in the woods. They'd been vanishing for months, all people living on the edge of society. Hungry, sick, unnoticed. Something in those woods is taking them, changing them, twisting them into something between human and beast. Maybe a disease, maybe evolution, maybe something supernatural. I don't know. But I know what I saw. Even now, driving past that store on my overnight routes, I see them. Standing in the tree line, upright, watching. Their eyes still glowing, but every time they look more intelligent, more aware, more patient. I finished my degree. I work from home now. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear those claws outside my window. Sometimes I find myself sniffing the air without thinking. And I wonder if whatever touched them touched me too. If you're ever driving the highway near Wasilla at night and you see something watching from the trees, don't stop. Don't investigate. Don't look twice. Some transformations can't be undone, and some hungers never go away. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I drove long-haul freight across Alaska for 5 years, running night routes between Anchorage and Eagle River with a Kenworth T680 that I knew better than my own apartment. I hauled everything from restaurant supplies to industrial fuel drums to snowmobile parts. I used to think that after half a decade of driving solo through blizzards, whiteout conditions, drunk stumbling across the highway near the bars downtown, wildlife jumping out of the tree line, and every kind of freezing nightmare Alaska could throw at a man, I had seen it all. Moose bigger than small cars wandering straight onto the road, drunk pedestrians trying to race 18-wheelers, drivers skidding sideways across black ice, and even one guy who parked his snow machine on the middle of the Glen Highway like it was a rest stop. I thought nothing could scare me anymore. But what happened on February 2nd, 2023, changed everything I ever believed about the world. After that night, I quit trucking, left Alaska for good, and moved back to California. I still wake up drenched in sweat sometimes because I know the truth about what was sitting in the dark that night. Some people on the road aren't human. Running a freight truck through Alaska's winter isn't for the weak. The cold isn't just weather. It's something that tries to get into your bones. But it paid well. On a good night, I could make more in a shift than some people made in a week. I usually started my load runs around sunset and didn't finish until the next morning. A busy haul meant good money, and sometimes double rates if the freight was urgent. My truck had good tires, chains, emergency heaters, and I kept my cab spotless because it was either that or slowly go insane in the claustrophobic mess truckers sometimes live in. My rig had cameras front and back for safety and company policy. I carried emergency gear in the cab, because in Alaska, if you break down in the wrong stretch of road, nobody saves you. Not unless the weather lets them. February 2nd was the coldest night I had ever driven in. -28 degrees Fahrenheit on the highway signs. That kind of cold makes engines scream and metal brittle. The streets were glassy with ice. Every truck stop looked dead. Even the usual drunks weren't hanging around parking lots. The roads were mostly empty by midnight, too dangerous for most drivers. But I took the load anyway. I needed the money for my last semester of business classes at UAA. The company dispatch sent me a load assignment to pick up a crate from an old warehouse near Mountain View and deliver it to a remote drop-off deep in the Chugach Mountains. Remote meant extra pay. A long distance, straight through the woods outside the city. I accepted. Everyone who lives in Anchorage knows Mountain View. The kind of neighborhood with police cars, boarded windows, and stories you don't tell tourists. I had hauled freight through there plenty of times. I wasn't scared of it. I pulled my truck into the old industrial lot behind a pair of rusted trailers. The place was dead silent. Snow was piled into frozen mountains. Half the lights were out. The rest flickered like they were about to give up. I backed my trailer up to the loading bay, waiting for the warehouse worker to bring out the freight. 3 minutes later, the steel door rolled up. A man stepped out into the cold. At first, he just looked tall. Alaska has tall people. Thick coats and boots make everyone look bigger. But as he walked closer, I realized something was off. He was towering over the crates and pallets. Easily 6'6", maybe more. He wore a huge winter coat zipped all the way up and a hat pulled down over his eyes. He didn't speak when he walked up to the truck. He lifted the freight onto my trailer like it weighed nothing. That crate should have been heavy enough to need a forklift, but he slid it right in with his bare hands. "Delivery to Eagle River," he said, in a voice that didn't sound like one voice at all. It sounded like two perfectly timed voices speaking in unison. He turned to leave, but before he walked back into the warehouse, he stopped and stared straight at me. That stare made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I locked the freight in place and sealed the trailer. As I climbed back into my cab, something hit me. That smell. A sour, rotten stench. Like spoiled meat mixed with wet fur. I thought maybe a dead animal was frozen near the dock. I rolled the window down to get fresh air. I started the drive out of a lot and hit the highway. Roads were empty. My headlights cut through the frozen darkness like blades. The load was quiet. No rattling. No shifting. Just that smell lingering in the air. The man hadn't spoken again, but the sound of his voice stayed in my head. I kept driving. 20 minutes into the highway, the temperature dropped even lower. The cold wind sounded like it was screaming across the metal skin of my truck. Then something moved in my side view mirror. Something big. At first I thought it was a trick of light, maybe a snowdrift. But when I looked again, I saw a shadow moving along the side of my trailer. A tall figure walking on the ice, keeping pace with an 18-wheeler moving 60 miles an hour. I slowed down. The figure slowed down with me. I hit the gas. It kept up. The shadow leaned forward on unnatural limbs, crouching, watching me through the mirror. Its outline was all wrong. Arms too long, legs bent backward like an animal. The worst part was, I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anything at all. No crunch of snow. No breathing. Just silence. I tried to ignore it. I needed to deliver my load. I turned onto a narrow side road toward Eagle River. A thick line of trees swallowed the highway. The only light came from my headlights bouncing off the snow. The radio flickered. Static. The kind of static that sounds alive. My radio wasn't supposed to pick up stations that far out in the mountains, but it did. And the voice that came through the speakers was the same double-toned voice from the warehouse. "Keep driving," it said. The trailer shifted. Something moved inside. Something massive slammed against the wall. The entire truck shook. I gripped the wheel as the rig skidded a few inches on the icy road. I thought the cargo was loose. Maybe the seal broke. I slowed to check. That was the mistake that almost killed me. I climbed down out of the cab, boots hitting the snow. My breath came out in a cloud. The trees around me towered like frozen skeletons. My flashlight cut through the dark. I walked around the truck, checking the lock. The door was still latched shut. But then I saw it. Scratches on the metal. Not from tools. From claws. That's when the freight door creaked open from the inside. I stepped backward. My flashlight shook in my hand. Something was pushing the door outward, not with hands. With strength. The crate inside had burst open. The rotten smell poured out so thick I could taste it in the air. And then I saw a shape inside the trailer. Pale gray skin stretched tight over ribs. Limbs too long. A jaw too wide. Yellow eyes glowing in the shadows. It stepped out. Not like a man climbing down. It dropped to the ground in one movement. Silent. Its coat slid off and fell in the snow. It stood there tall and wrong. Its fingers were black and curved like claws. Its mouth stretched wide, showing rows of sharp teeth. More teeth than a human could ever have. "You brought me home," it said in that layered voice. My legs wouldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stared at it like I was staring at death itself. It stepped closer. Its neck twisted, not turned, twisted. Bones cracked, skin stretched. Its body contorted into shapes that defied everything a human skeleton can do. It grew taller. 7 feet, maybe more. It leaned close and sniffed the air near my face. I knew what that meant. Hunger. I turned and ran. I climbed into my truck and slammed the door. I hit the ignition. My engine roared. I floored it. I floored it. Tires spun across the ice until they caught grip. The creature scraped its claws across the door as I pulled away. The metal screamed. It chased the truck, running fast across the snow on legs that bent like an animal's. It stayed beside my rig for seconds before dropping behind into the darkness. I didn't stop driving until the street lights of downtown Anchorage came into view. I parked at the nearest gas station and sat there in silence. My heart pounded hard enough to shake my whole body. When I checked the freight manifest on my truck tablet, the assignment was gone, not canceled. Gone. Like it never existed. No warehouse address, no tracking number. No client request, no logs. I drove back to the warehouse later that week in daylight. The lot was empty. The building was gone, completely gone. Not closed, not abandoned. Gone. According to the city records, it had been condemned and torn down 8 months earlier. But I was there that night. I saw the man. I hauled the crate. I researched the drop-off address in the mountains. The police records match exactly. 3 missing hikers found in that region over the last 12 years. Bodies stripped clean. Bones snapped like twigs. The bite marks didn't match wolves, didn't match bears. Didn't match anything in Alaska. I talked to an elder at the Alaska Native Heritage Center. When I described the creature, she didn't laugh. She told me one word. Wendigo. A spirit that used to be human. A cannibal spirit. Tall. Starved. Impossible to satisfy. It mimics people just long enough to hunt. It survives in winter. It follows you. And it never stops being hungry. After that meeting, I quit trucking immediately. I left Alaska and went back to California. Got a normal job. Bought a normal car. I tried to forget that night. But sometimes when I'm driving alone, I smell that rotten meat again. I hear the static. My radio flickers on the same voice. The same clicking sound. I see something big in my mirrors, running just out of sight. I know the Wendigo remembers me. I know it still wants something. If you're ever out on a long, dark highway and you see something standing by the road, or moving beside your truck, or riding the wind across the snow, trust your instincts. Don't stop. Don't check. Don't ask questions. Some freight shouldn't be hauled. Some shadows aren't human. And the Wendigo is always hungry. My name is Robert Martinez, and I've spent most of my life hauling freight across the United States. I started driving right after high school, learning everything from my uncle who drove long-haul rigs up and down the oil fields in Texas and New Mexico. Since then, I've hauled everything you can imagine: construction equipment, refrigerated loads, heavy machinery, medical supplies. I've driven through hurricanes in Louisiana, dust storms in Arizona, ice storms in Montana, and heat waves in Nevada. I've seen jackknifed semis folded like paper, tankers in flames at midnight, and wrecks that made grown men look away. I've seen drivers crushed under their own rigs. I've seen bodies on highways covered with tarps. Most people would walk away from trucking forever after witnessing that. But the money kept me going. The paycheck was always better than anything else out there. When North Star Logistics offered me triple pay for Arctic hauling, I didn't hesitate. All I had to do was run deliveries in the northern Alaskan wilderness for 6 months a year. I figured the isolation and weather would be the worst parts. I was wrong. The real threat up there wasn't weather, machinery, or the ice. It was something we never should have disturbed. I arrived near Teshekpuk Lake in January. My route was simple on paper-run supply convoys and heavy equipment to a remote pipeline expansion project about 15 miles northeast of the Trans-Alaska Line. Most drivers turned the contract down. Too isolated. Too freezing. Too dangerous. But I'd always considered myself better than the average driver. I'd hauled through blizzards that buried cars where they stood. I'd run ice roads before, the kind where one mistake and you're 100 feet underwater. Teshekpuk wasn't like any place I'd been. The landscape was nothing but frozen tundra stretching forever in all directions. No towns. No gas stations. No power lines. No birds. No animals. No windbreaks. Just white emptiness and the sound of your own breathing. We lived in modified shipping containers bolted down in rows, connected by covered walkways so no one had to go outside without Arctic gear. Every container had 2 bunks, a propane heater, and barely enough room for gear. Satellite radio was our only lifeline to the outside world, and even that cut out most days. The closest human contact was hundreds of miles away. The job was exhausting but straightforward. 12-hour shifts behind the wheel in temperatures that stayed 40 or 50 below zero. Every rig was Arctic modded engine heaters, insulated cabs, oversized tires, replacement hoses, diesel designed for sub-zero ignition. We hauled pipe sections the size of small houses. Each section weighed several tons and had to be transported slowly over the ice. The roads weren't real roads, just carved paths through tundra and frozen lakes. The rules were simple: never drive alone, always check in, never step outside without full gear. Frostbite wasn't a threat. It was guaranteed if you weren't careful. There were 6 of us truckers working that route. Most of us had driven together before. Jim Morrison was the lead driver and convoy boss. He'd hauled the original pipeline back in the 1970s. The best driver among us, without question, was Dave Kowalski. He'd been hauling in Alaska for nearly 14 years. He knew the ice roads better than any man alive. He drove like the truck was part of him. He never missed a shift, never slowed down, never seemed bothered by the cold. He was the guy the rest of us trusted when things went bad. On February 14th, everything changed. That morning was perfect by Arctic standards. The temperature hovered around -40. The wind was calm, visibility was good. We were scheduled to run our final load, a convoy carrying the last sections of pipeline. After that run, we were ahead of schedule. We were looking forward to being done early. Everyone was in a good mood, except one thing. Dave didn't show up. At first, Jim figured he overslept. It happened sometimes with new guys, but never with Dave. We checked his sleeping container. His bunk was untouched. His duffel bag, personal items, and spare clothes were all there. His phone, wallet, everything. But his truck keys and his Arctic gear were sitting neatly by the door. No trucker goes outside without gear, not ever. Not in that cold. It's the same as leaving your engine running and walking away. You don't do it unless you want to die. Jim got nervous fast. We searched everything: fuel depot, storage building, generator shack, every truck, every walkway. Nothing. So Jim ordered a field search. He took me, Mike, and Tony. The rest stayed on radios. The snow was fresh from a storm the night before, so footprints were easy to spot. We found Dave's tracks immediately. The prints led away from the camp. But the spacing was wrong, too far apart. Like he had been running. Nobody runs in that weather. Sweat freezes your clothes. Your lungs seize. Running in -40 is suicide. Half a mile out, we found shredded pieces of Dave's reflective jacket caught in the ice and snow. The edges were torn like something had clawed through the fabric, but there were no animal tracks. No tire marks. No drag marks from wind. Just gouged fabric and Dave's footprints heading deeper into the tundra. We followed the trail toward Teshitpuk Lake. We'd seen it before from the road. A frozen sheet stretching to the horizon. None of us ever got close. There was no reason to. Except now. The closer we got, the stranger the tracks became. Dave's footprints started to stagger. Then they turned into long drag marks like something huge was being dragged or pulled. Wide, deep furrows in the ice, almost 10 feet across. Like a massive cable or serpent had scraped across the tundra. At the lake's edge, everything stopped. There, in the middle of the frozen lake, was a hole in the ice almost 20 feet across. The ice should have been 6 feet thick or more. Nothing should be able to break through that. But this hole wasn't broken, it was blown open. Massive slabs of ice lay scattered across the lake like someone had blown it apart from below. Right at the edge of the hole were Dave's boots, placed perfectly side by side, like he'd taken them off intentionally before stepping into a frozen lake. No footprints led away, just the boots. We reported it immediately. Search and rescue refused to send divers. Water was too cold, ice too unstable. They promised sonar when weather improved. That meant days or weeks. That night, none of us slept. Around midnight, we heard noises coming from the lake. Deep, low, rumbling sounds that carried across the ice. Not wind. Not machinery. Almost like singing. Slow, rhythmic, like something calling from underwater. Mike said it sounded like whales. But we were hundreds of miles from the ocean. Around 3 in the morning, it got worse. Something slammed into the underside of the lake. The ice cracked and boomed like artillery fire. The impacts were so strong, they shook our sleeping containers even though we were miles away. The sound of ice fracturing echoed across the tundra for almost an hour. Then everything stopped. In the morning, Jim made us check the lake again. The hole was bigger, 3 times bigger. The ice around it wasn't just cracked anymore, it was torn apart, deep gouges carved into the edges. Marks like claws, a foot long or more. Something huge had climbed out. That was enough for Jim. He called headquarters and declared emergency shutdown. They weren't happy, but they approved a helicopter extraction for the next morning. We started securing the trucks when Tony shouted and pointed across the tundra. Someone was walking toward us. At first we thought it was rescue, or another crew, or local, but when the figure got closer we saw it wasn't any of those. It was Dave. He was walking toward us across the ice with no clothes, no boots, in temperatures that kill in minutes. But his skin wasn't blue or black. It was gray. Metallic. He moved like someone who didn't remember how to walk. We yelled his name. He didn't react. He came closer. His eyes were white. Not cloudy or frozen, just pure white. Like someone erased the pupils, he opened his mouth. No words came out, just water. Dark water, thick and endless, pouring from his mouth like someone turned on a faucet inside his lungs. It streamed from his nose, his eyes, his ears. Black water that smelled like dead fish and rot. It froze instantly when it hit the snow. The ice spread outward from his feet. He collapsed. The water kept flowing, freezing around him. In seconds, he was entombed in ice. A human shape inside a crystal block, eyes open. We evacuated immediately. The helicopter came 6 hours later. They flew us straight to Fairbanks. North Star put us in a hotel and told us not to speak to anyone. They told Dave's family he died in an accident. Officially, they never found a body. I spent nights researching Teshekpuk. The locals believe the lake is sacred. They tell stories of something that lives beneath the ice, something that takes people who disturb it. It doesn't kill them, it changes them. Turns them into hollow shells, alive on land but filled with water inside. North Star canceled the pipeline project, officially for environmental protection. But every driver who was there knows the real reason. Something lives in that lake. Something ancient. Something that doesn't want us there. Now I run routes in Texas. I don't care about the heat. I don't care about traffic. I'll take deserts and pavement over frozen lakes any day. Sometimes I stare at satellite images of Teshekpuk. Even in the dead of winter, even when the entire region freezes solid, the ice around that hole never fully seals. Sometimes you can see something moving under the ice. Huge. Coiled. Waiting. Dave's family thinks he's buried somewhere up there. I know where he is. Some places should never be entered. Some land is sacred for a reason. Some loads aren't worth the paycheck. And there are roads no truck should ever travel. My name is Kevin Nakamura, and I've been a long-haul trucker for years. I started driving freight haulers right after I finished high school in Nome, Alaska. My father drove semis before me, and his father before him. I grew up believing trucking wasn't just a job. It was blood. It was the kind of life that carves itself into your bones and never lets go. It's harsh, lonely, and if you screw up once, the road will take you. But if you understand the highways, if you respect the cold, and if you don't mind the endless miles of snow-covered asphalt, it's good money. I've driven every season Alaska can throw at you. Summer runs along the pipeline roads, winter freight deliveries through blizzards that swallow the world whole. I've been caught in storms that turned highways into death traps. I've had rigs stall at 60 miles per hour on black ice and held the wheel while crosswinds tried to flip my truck like a toy. I've dragged stranded drivers out of frozen wrecks before hypothermia killed them. After years on the road, I believed I had seen every nightmare the North could produce. But what happened that February changed everything I knew about what waits out here. I still drive today. But I don't take winter ice road runs anymore. Not after that night. If you listen through this story, you'll understand why. Ice road trucking in Alaska isn't anything like what outsiders imagine. It isn't just white roads and slow driving. You don't just sit in a heated cab drinking coffee and waiting for spring. Winter is the only time when some routes are even drivable. Frozen lakes become highways. Ice thickens into roads strong enough to carry rigs loaded with thousands of pounds of cargo. Deliveries to the oil fields, remote villages, mining sites. Those only happen when the ice is reliable. February is the last safe month. By March, the ice starts lying to you. It looks solid, but some parts are rotten. One wrong turn and you end up going through a sheet of ice into water that'll kill you before you can even get your door open. You have to read the ice, and you have to read the road. The wind, the sound under your tires, the cracks hidden beneath snow. If you don't understand it, the road will swallow you whole. That day, I was running a transport with my partner, Jake Morrison. He'd been driving the Arctic roads longer than me. If there's anyone who knows when ice can hold a full-loaded rig, it's Jake. He taught me how to hear weak spots beneath the engine noise. He taught me when to trust the ice and when to run. Jake had never been wrong before. We'd been through blizzards, ice storms, sleet, and whiteouts together. Never a serious accident, never a close call. It was supposed to be our final run of the season. The forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, moderate winds, steady temperatures below zero. Ideal conditions for one last delivery before we shut down winter operations for the year. We started early in the morning, around the first light. We prepped our rigs the same way we always did. Extra diesel, backup batteries, tools, food, water, survival packs, emergency flares, tow lines, and ice picks. In Alaska, you don't bring what you need. You bring twice what you need. Preparation isn't optional. It's the difference between getting home or becoming someone's ghost story. We drove out onto the ice road that crossed one of the frozen coastal inlets. We'd made that run dozens of times. 18 miles across the ice. The ice there was nearly thick enough to hold trucks heavier than ours by far. We stopped halfway through to check the integrity like we always did. Jake got out first and tapped the ice with a metal rod. Solid. No cracking, no hollow resonance. Just deep, safe thickness. I trusted that road like I trusted Jake's judgment. We continued on. The haul was good at first. The road felt steady. The island ahead sat like a white shadow on the horizon. Jake was joking on the radio about how we were going to finish early and spend the rest of the day sleeping in a warm cabin. But then around mid-morning, something started bothering me. I kept seeing something ahead of us on the ice. A dark shape moving under the frozen surface. At first, I thought it was a pressure ridge or an underwater current, but it was too defined. Too big. I radioed Jake and told him to slow down. We stopped and stepped out onto the ice road. I walked toward the dark shape and knelt down. Beneath the frozen surface was a shadow. It moved like it was circling us. Too slow to be water. Too controlled to be a current. I called Jake over. He knelt beside me and watched the shadow pass under our feet. It wasn't drifting. It was pacing. Jake said it was probably a seal trapped under the ice. That happens sometimes. Seals look for openings when the inlets freeze over. But something about the way it moved felt wrong. A trapped animal panics. This thing was slow and steady. It was watching us. As the day passed, the shadow didn't leave. It kept circling beneath the ice, always passing under our rigs like it was following us. Jake tried knocking on the ice to scare it away. Instead of moving off, it came closer. Every instinct inside me tightened like a fist. That was the first time I knew something wasn't right. We kept driving. Noon passed. The shadow stayed with us like it was tracking the rigs. I slowed to check again. As it drifted closer to the surface, the shape sharpened. It didn't look like a seal. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. It was shaped like a person. Jake leaned over and tried to get a better look. I told him we needed to move, but he brushed it off. He said maybe it was some kind of diver. Someone lost under the ice. Then, before either of us could react, something surged from below and slammed into the bottom of Jake's truck. His rig rocked so violently he was nearly thrown forward into the windshield. His radio flew out of his hand. Something strong enough to shift a loaded semi from beneath the ice was never a seal. We both stared through the frozen surface. Something pale pressed its face against the underside of the ice. Jake pulled out a flashlight and shined it onto the surface. That was when we saw the face. It was human-shaped, but twisted into something wrong. Its skin was a sick, pale green, like metal that had been underwater too long. Its eyes were huge. Entirely black, no whites at all. Its nose was nothing but two slits. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, full of sharp, needle-long teeth. Long hair floated around its head even though it was frozen beneath solid ice. Its webbed hands ended in claws. It pressed one of those claws against the ice like it was trying to scratch through. It reached upward like it wanted Jake. We ran back to our rigs. But before we even got the doors shut, we heard splashing further down the road. 6 more dark shapes were rising up through cracks and holes in the ice. 6 faces. 6 sets of black eyes staring at us through the frozen surface. They didn't stay beneath it. They pulled themselves up through the cracks and holes like climbing out of water. Water spilled off them and froze instantly, turning the ice around them black and slick. When they stood, they were too tall, too long-limbed, more than 6 feet, spindly but powerful. Their jaws clicked. Their claws scraped against the ice. One of them opened its mouth. The voice wasn't human. It sounded like water draining through a pipe. "Come with us." We didn't wait. We jumped into the trucks and floored it. The rigs roared to life. The tires spun on the ice before they caught traction. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creatures drop onto their bellies and slide across the ice toward us. Their claws dug into the surface, pulling them forward faster than any animal I'd ever seen. Faster than a human sprint. They clicked and hissed to each other in a language I'd never heard. They were gaining. The road ahead stretched like salvation. We pushed the trucks harder than we ever should have. The ice groaned under the weight. I could hear it crack beneath the tires. I didn't care. We just kept going. When I looked back again, the creatures had stopped. They turned away and slid back toward the holes they crawled out of, as if they only wanted to scare us off. We didn't stop driving until we were on solid ground again. The moment we hit the main land route, Jake called the authorities. The state troopers, the rescue units, even the Coast Guard. They listened to our story, but nobody believed us. They said ice can play tricks. Light refracts. Shadows distort. They said truckers hallucinate after long hours. But Jake and I knew what we saw. The next morning, we returned with Dr. Toctor. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist from the University of Alaska. She took samples and measurements of the ice. Those holes and cracks were gone. The entire surface had refrozen. Not just a thin sheet, feet thick. Ice that would take weeks to form, she confirmed it. It shouldn't be possible. When we told her what we saw, pale skin, claws, needle teeth, long hair, black eyes, she said the same thing we were too afraid to say. Inuit legends, creatures called Qualupalik. Water spirits that drag travelers beneath the ice. Not animals. Not hallucinations. Something real. I quit winter ice road trucking that day. I still drive, but only in summer. Jake moved to Anchorage and started working construction. He says he still dreams about those faces under the ice. I keep dreaming about it too. I'm alone on the frozen road. I look down through the ice and see them staring up. They don't chase me. They wait, like they know I'll come back. Like they have forever. I don't believe in legends the way scientists do. I believe in what I saw. If you ever drive a truck on the Alaskan ice roads, remember this story. If you see shadows moving beneath you, don't stay, don't check. Don't think. Just leave. Some things under the ice aren't meant to be looked at, and they're always waiting. My name is Mike Henderson, and I've spent years driving trucks through Alaska's frozen highways. I used to think the road was the perfect place for someone like me. Endless miles of isolation, my thoughts buried under snow and diesel fumes, and no one to ask questions I didn't want to answer. After my divorce, the silence felt like a blessing. The highway was my escape. The kind of escape a man disappears into when he wants to forget. But ever since that winter, I don't know if I'm still Mike Henderson at all. Sometimes I stare into the side mirror of my rig and something else stares back. The shape is mine, the body is mine, but the eyes don't belong to any human. The thing living behind my reflection feels like it's waiting for a moment when my body stops being mine. I became a trucker to get away from the world for a while. Now I'm not sure I ever really came back from that winter. I took night routes because nobody else wanted them. Who would? In Alaska, winter isn't just weather. It's alive. A living thing with teeth and claws that digs into the bones of anyone foolish enough to challenge it. The roads become graveyards. The dark stretches across the sky for 18 hours a day. The air seizes your lungs and stops your heart halfway through the breath. People think the danger is the snow or the black ice. But there's something else out there, something that lives in the lonely miles between towns, something that wakes up when the headlights touch the snow. When you drive alone across miles of untouched wilderness, the silence crawls inside your head. It grows there. It feeds. You start hearing things that don't belong to the world of the living. You forget what daylight looks like. The stretch between midnight and dawn becomes endless. The road doesn't feel like asphalt anymore. It feels like an artery connecting you to something ancient and hungry. The station I delivered to most often was an old transport depot off Route 11. It had been built in 1959 on land that everyone said should have stayed untouched. The company that built it dug too deep into frozen ground that had never been thawed since the world began. I'd heard the stories from older truckers. They said the ground there remembered things no one should disturb, things older than any town or highway. I never believed them. Alaska is full of myths. But I learned fast. That depot sitting in the middle of nowhere didn't feel like part of the road. It felt like something waiting. The concrete walls were too old. The ground always felt like it shifted under my boots. And at 2 a.m., when the diesel pumps shut down and the wind stopped, you could hear something moving beneath the pavement. Not wind, not machinery. Something heavy. something whispering in a language no human should hear. The ground groaned like the bones of the earth were cracking open. The security lights flickered in perfect sequence, like they were following invisible footsteps. The motion sensors never picked up anything. No warm body. No animal. Just cold. Something colder than the world outside. January 13th was the night everything changed. The temperature dropped below -50. The windows of my rig frosted from the inside. I was alone at that depot as usual, but the darkness felt different. The night outside the glass wasn't darkness. It was a living mass pushing against the world. The diesel pumps hissed like they were struggling for breath. The parking lot felt narrower, like the world around me was shrinking. I was checking my tires when I smelled it for the first time. A wave of sweet rot, like meat left to decay in an oven. But under that scent was something else. Something that smelled like fear, like blood, like the moment just before the kill. The smell led me away from my truck, toward a maintenance shed sitting at the edge of the lot. Each step across the snow felt like a warning. The walls were wrong, too dark, frost clinging in shapes like symbols. I had been coming there for years and never saw those marks before. They shifted when I looked at them, like shadows slipping away from the beam of my flashlight. The smell grew thicker. I could taste it on my tongue. Inside the shed, I found a shipping crate that wasn't listed on the manifests. Its wood was swollen and soaked with something dark and sticky. When I pried it open, hundreds of dead rats spilled onto the ground. They were grotesque, bloated, with their bodies stretched in impossible ways, as if something inside had clawed to escape. Their skin was split open, and from the torn flesh crawled things that were not rats and not insects. 6 inches long, too many legs, and eyes like black beads of glass. They watched me. Not like animals, like something trying to understand me. Their bodies clicked gently on the concrete. The sound was soft, but it echoed inside my skull like a memory I didn't recognize. I grabbed my radio to call dispatch, but the signal wasn't dead. It was gone. Silent. Like it had never been connected. My cell had service outside, but down here, it was as if the air itself swallowed the signal. The shed wasn't just isolating me. It felt like it was sealing me off from the world. I should have left. I should have listened to every instinct I had. That was the last moment where I still had a choice. But I stayed. The creatures crawled toward me. They didn't move randomly. They crawled with intent. When they touched my boots, I braced for pain, but instead heat spread through the rubber soles. They generated warmth in a room colder than death. Then they climbed my legs faster than I could brush them off. Their bodies radiated a strange warmth through my clothing. I felt numbness spread through my skin as if the parts they touched simply stopped existing. It didn't hurt. It was as if those pieces of me were being erased. When I got back to my rig that night, I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel anything. My fingers pressed against my face and felt nothing. They looked normal, but under the skin there was movement. Dark shapes drifting through my veins like insects swimming through mud. I drove to the nearest town. I went to the emergency room. The doctor checked me. X-rays, blood tests, nothing. She looked at me like I was insane. When I described the creatures, she recommended I speak to a psychiatrist. That night, lying in a hospital bed, I heard the whispers. Not from outside. From under my skin. The creatures were speaking, not in words. Not in language. In impulses. They were rewriting my body from the inside, turning muscle and bone into something else. Something not meant for this world. I went to specialists. I drove to Anchorage. I spoke to experts in parasitic infections. All of them found nothing wrong. But I was changing. My face in the mirror wasn't proportioned the same anymore. My voice sounded different. Food tasted alien. My memories were fading. Sometimes I remembered my childhood from a point of view that wasn't mine, like I was watching myself through someone else's eyes. I searched for answers. Government records. Trucking logs. Highway closures. Historical archives. Every time I got close to something relevant, pages were missing. Files corrupted. Documents vanished. Something wanted the truth gone. Eventually, I found something in old trading company logs from the 1800s. That depot wasn't built on empty land. It was built on a mass grave from 1847. A Gwich'in village wiped out by something the Hudson's Bay traders called the hungry darkness. They described people losing control of their bodies, children waking up with someone else behind their eyes, villagers speaking in layered voices. The traders tried to stop it. They burned the village, buried it beneath frozen earth, thinking the cold would kill it. But cold doesn't kill things like that. Cold preserves them. The depot wasn't built on solid ground. It was built on a burial chamber. And every winter, the heat from trucks thawed that chamber a little more. When I returned to the depot weeks later, the crate was gone. In its place was a hole carved into the concrete. A perfect circle leading into a darkness deeper than darkness. My flashlight vanished into it. The walls were covered in twisting symbols. And I wasn't alone. Figures stood in the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. Other truckers. Missing drivers stretching back decades. I recognized their faces from photos pinned to truck stop bulletin boards. Missing, never found. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They smiled too wide. Their voices layered in a chorus. They told me the hungry darkness needed caretakers. Drivers to feed it warmth, to keep the highway awake. The job paid well because nobody ever quit. I tried to run. My legs didn't move. The creatures weren't done with me. They were molding me, training me, turning me into one of them. That was 10 months ago. I still drive the midnight run. The company loves me. They gave me a raise. They say I never complain. They say I never take days off. But I'm not Mike Henderson anymore. Not really. Mike is still here somewhere, screaming from behind my eyes, trapped under skin that isn't his anymore. During the day, I visit my kids. I stand in their bedrooms. I listen to their breathing. No one notices the way my handwriting has changed. No one notices when I forget which child belongs to me. The thing inside me is learning. It can mimic my voice now, my smile. It's patient. And sometimes when I watch my children sleep, the creature inside wonders if they too would make good hosts one day. The transport depot is always hiring night drivers. The pay is excellent. The hours are short. All you have to do is work alone on a stretch of highway where the world goes silent. If you're reading this, don't apply for that route. Don't drive past that depot after dark. Because Mike Henderson is still there, buried inside a body that's not his anymore. And he's hungry.